Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Jodessy and I'm bringing to you a brand new series, and this is going to be Melanated Mysteries. So basically this is going to be a true crime and makeup style video. I've absolutely loved makeup for so long, and I've loved true crime for so long, and a lot of people were putting them together, and you know, Bailey Sarian inspired. And I was like, hey, let me try to do it too. So I started this series because I don't see a lot of people that look like me that do this. So, hey, let's get into this case. So, LAPD arrest a man for rape and he's in jail, and they accidentally realize that they arrested a serial killer that has over 10 victims. And normally when we speak about serial killers, we're speaking about people who have 3 victims or more. Before we delve into today's story, I just want to give you guys the warning and the disclaimer that this video is going to contain graphic descriptions of violent crimes, and it might not be suitable for all viewers. So if things like rape, strangulation, death, murder, wrongfully convicted, if any of those are triggers for you, just go ahead and click off the video. I have many other videos on my channel that have nothing to do with murder, so if you can't handle it, just, you don't got to be in this kitchen. This case is going to be the case of Chester Turner. Okay, so bear with me. It is my very first video of this sort, so I don't really know how this really works. Okay, Chester Turner is born on November 5th, 1966, and that is going to be making him a Scorpio. I have my own feelings about Scorpios. I don't know how you guys feel about Scorpios, but if you're not too happy with Scorpios, this case isn't going to make it any better. Okay, so he was born actually in Warren, Arkansas. However, he had not committed any crimes in Warren, Arkansas at all, because his crimes were all committed in Los Angeles. Chester Dwayne Turner, he actually moved to the California area around 4 or 5 years old. Some places say 4, but he himself says 5. But he's a murderer, so do we trust him? But I'm assuming it's 5. Okay? So according to his mother, there was no childhood abuse or anything like that, no acts of childhood violence. However, when I was looking, I did find this one source, and it wasn't the most, trustworthy source, so we're going to just take this with a grain of salt, that said that he had done a stint living with his father. And when he did a stint living with his father, that his father basically had a new wife and stepchildren, and that they would beat him, and they would all kind of gather around and watch him beat him. And that was like some of the childhood abuse that he suffered. But I couldn't find that anywhere else on any documentary. He hadn't said anything about that either. So I'm not really sure where this person got that from. But put it with a grain of salt. Maybe it did happen, and everybody just forgot to mention it. That Chester really did say happened, or that he did allude to, was that his dad was an alcoholic, and he was a violent alcoholic according to Chester. And Chester actually claims that the reason for the divorce between his mom and his dad was because he would be abusive when he got drunk, and that was reason for the split and sort of that drastic move from Arkansas to LA. And LA is where he is going to be growing up. So in school, Chester was he didn't have that many friends, it seems, and that was partially due to his behavior, how he was acting. He was actually known, and he caught the nickname of Chester the Molester, and that was because he and his female classmates had a really strange relationship, because he would keep touching them, and he would keep touching them and being basically inappropriate to them, which to me just screams entitlement. Why do you feel so entitled to the female body, the female anatomy? what about this is making it making you feel so comfortable, right? Because normally we don't really see it. However, we don't normally see like stuff like that in grade school with children, but especially like children that don't have a background of some sort of abuse in their like in their history. But I didn't find any abuse or anything like that in his history. And it seemed like the only bullying that this boy has gone through is like as a result of like he's being called Chester the molester. So I don't know where this behavior came from. He hasn't let us know anything or anything like that. So he goes through grade school, finishes, middle school finishes, and he drops out when it is time for high school, and that is when he's going to get into a lot of like funky stuff, and he starts getting into drugs, I guess gang banging or whatever, and that's where he got the nickname Tutu, according to him. That's like his street gang nickname. Now, throughout this whole time, he's living with his mom, but then apparently his mom is going to get fed up with the nonsense of like just the drugs and the like the gangbanging. And remember, this is going to be in the 90s. This is going to be in LA. There's going to be a huge crack epidemic going on, especially in the area that they moved to. Basically using that as a method to make money. I didn't see anything that said like that he ever used any drugs or ever, but it seemed like that was just his way to make money. So if you look at a picture of him, you'll see that he actually does have a pretty prominent scar. And that scar goes from about like the back of his head here to about right here. Not quite the full, like, I don't know. In New York, they call it the buck 50, where you get sliced from like your ear to your lip. And it was like supposedly a gang initiation thing. However, his went from like all the way the back of his head to about right here, and it doesn't quite connect to his lip. And apparently the reason for this was that he was actually going to, he was actually going to sell drugs, and he was a few blocks away from his house. And you're going to see that the man likes to create and commit crimes in the area that he lives in, which I thought that was like super odd, because I always thought that people wouldn't want to commit crimes so close to home. But no, his house, his area, I don't know if it gave him a sense of like familiarity or whatever, but it really became like his stomping ground, and that is where he would commit most, if not all, of his crimes. He was sort of known to have a violent temper, and after a while in LA, and he had been arrested a few times on like petty stuff, petty crimes, he actually goes up to Utah, and while in Utah, he supposedly has this incident with one of his girlfriends. Whatever, like everybody else was telling this story, he was just like arrested on domestic violence. Like, you know, it's pretty simple. However, when he tells the story, because I did listen to a phone interview with him in it, and he basically did tell us the story of this arrest. He basically said that it was after the death of his grandfather. So after the death of his grandfather, he goes back to the hotel room that he had been living in with his girlfriend at the time. And she was asking him like, why are you so upset? Which is like really weird to ask someone. And he was basically like, what do you mean, why am I so upset? My grandfather just died. Which is like valid. Like if that's what's going on, yeah, valid. Like, my grandfather just died, I am upset. Escalating, according to Chester himself, and he says that he kicks this girl out of the hotel, right? So basically, unbeknownst to him, this girl goes to the police, and even though he said that he had paid for the hotel, I guess maybe her name was on the room or something, because he hears a knock. He describes hearing a knock on the door. So he described hearing a knock on the door, and then when he like went through the looked through the peephole, nobody was there. So then he opened the door, of course, and it was police officers with guns. So normally at this point, like, a sane person would have just like surrendered. But that's not what he did at all. He actually fights the cops, and there's like a struggle. They're doing a little tussle, and he ends up getting away. So when he gets away, he's running for blocks, and then he decides that he's going to hide under a car. However, of course, there's a lot of commotion going on, and one of the neighbors like had called into the police, I guess, and let the police know, like, yeah, the guy you're looking for is like under my car. At this point, there are helicopters and everybody's looking, so like all the neighbors, of course, are aware that there is some sort of chase going on, and they're screaming out the thing like, Mr. Turner, Mr. Turner, because of course they're trying to arrest him now because you've just like assaulted two police officers and got away, and now you're on the loose running through the streets of Utah. So this neighbor is going to be calling the police and just basically letting them know that he is, so basically letting them know that he is hiding and where he is. Then they find him, of course, and they pull him out from under the car. Apparently, they shot him 5 times in the right shoulder, but not, I don't think it was with like actual bullets. It was like with those like bean bag type bullet things. So that way, I don't know, just to get him out from, because you're hiding, you know, so they just trying to get him out from under the damn car. So they get him out from under the car, and he said that he is handcuffed, and he alleges that his leg was broken. Basically, the officer snapped his leg, like, kind of, like, you know, on purpose, which, like, could have happened, yeah, probably, because you just, like, assaulted them. But, you know, whatever. He says that they snapped his leg, and then he also says that he, like, their canine unit was there, because remember, this is a big thing. So they had the helicopters, they had the dogs out, everything. And he said that the canine had like bit onto his right arm while he was handcuffed, and then he kind of like stops telling the story. So like he kind of stops telling the story, so you're like, okay, well, what happens next? But basically what happens is, from what I could gather, something happened. Maybe he turned in a way, or like he headbutted this dog. I don't know what the man did. I have no idea what the man did, but the dog sustained injury. Chester himself described it as a small bump on the head. And he actually was charged with animal cruelty as well. And he said that in the documents, they said that he threw a sink at the dog, which, like, I don't know. That's kind of wild to me. Like, you threw a sink at the dog. But he said that that's nonsense, and basically that the charge basically came from when he was handcuffed and the dog was biting on his right arm, which I don't know if you believe. I don't know if I believe it either. I just don't understand how the dog would sustain a bump on his head, poor puppy, if you were handcuffed and you didn't do nothing to the dog. So I don't know, but the dog got some justice that day. So his first, I'm going to do a little backtrack. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to keep this as straight for you as possible, but this case is kind of all over the place. So after he was kicked out of his mom's house, he was kind of homeless, and he was hopping around from basically place to place, staying in hotels, getting his money on the fast side, the high life, the drug gang. And he did have some arrests, of course. He did have some arrests with drugs and alcohol related. His only seemingly like sexual arrest was basically it was an issue of flashing, which is super weird because he had flashed some people. They had reported it. He got arrested and like arraigned, whatever. I guess they gave him a date to appear, and then he was released, and then he went the same day and flashed more people. And I don't understand. I really don't know what to say about that. I know it's not funny, but it's just like the same day. Like, tell us you're not sorry without telling us you're not sorry. That the exact same day you got arrested. And also tell us you're guilty without telling us you're guilty. So he ended up getting charged with that as well. So after the whole hullabaloo, he was sent back to LA, and he was basically like homeless and dealing with like homelessness or whatever, and living basically bumping around from like, I guess what we would call shelter to shelter. So he's going basically from shelter to shelter. And he had one of those programs where he worked as a security guard. He worked as a security guard, and this is like the only other job I was able to find. His first job was like at Domino's when he was a teenager, and then I guess he just sold drugs, because this is the only other job that I've heard of him having. And it was as security for this homeless shelter that he also said that he stayed in. So he lived in this homeless shelter, and that he worked there as well. And he actually ran into this woman named Maria Martinez. Now, Maria Martinez is 47. She is living in this shelter in downtown LA, and she's living in basically the same shelter as him, and that's the one that he works at. So Maria was pretty familiar with him, and she had seen him around. So one day, in March 22, while Maria was walking downtown, he sees her, and he basically asks her for a cigarette. And when she goes to go ahead and give him the cigarette, it turns out that that was a trap, and he pulls her behind some dumpsters and he assaults her. Right? So he pulls her behind some dumpsters, he assaults her, and that is pretty much the end of that. He does not kill her. He, in fact, actually, like, walks her home, which I thought was, like, real weird. And apparently, on the walk home or on the way back to the shelter, because, like, they both kind of knew each other, so it was, like, a weird vibe going on. But apparently on the way back to the shelter, she says that she wants to make a stop, and the stop that she wanted to make was the police station, as she should, because, sir, you just assaulted me, right? So then Chester notices, like, oh, we're like, either he notices when they're like at the police station, or he notices like that they're at the police station, and he's like, or like on the way, and he's like, girl, if you report me, I will kill you. Stop playing games with me. Right? So she's like, oh, okay then. Well, then I guess I won't report you. And then he brings her back to the shelter. So when she gets back to the homeless shelter, she apparently like takes a shower, and then she, like, I guess she was planning on not saying anything, but it just proved to be too much, and she ends up breaking down and speaking to one of the counselors that are there, as she should, because that's what, of course, the counselors are there for, to support you. So he is actually arrested for this crime, because the counselor, she did her job. Well, they did their job. I don't know if it's a guy or girl. And he was arrested, and he's going to be found guilty, and he received 8 years in prison for the rape of Maria Martinez. Now, this is where everything happens, and it sort of kind of goes left and crazy and center all at the same time. So basically, around this time, California was under some new legislation, and they had a brand new law which basically put the system of CODIS into effect. So CODIS is going to be the California's combined DNA index system, and basically the system had it so if you were convicted of a felony, that you needed to basically provide your DNA into the system. And what they were going to do with that DNA is just like basically log it just in case you ever did something again. What unexpectedly happened when they did collect Mr. Turner's DNA, and they collected Mr. Turner's DNA and they added him to this nice little fancy new CODIS system. Actually, based on that sample of DNA that they took from him upon arrest in 2002 for the rape, his DNA actually hit on many other unsolved murders. So remember, he's in jail for 8 years for a rape. And they're just like, oh, this guy, it's his first rape offense. Remember, his other offense seemed to be just like flashing. However, so he's not really seen as like some really super dangerous criminal or whatever. But then they put his DNA into the system, and he is not a rapist, he is a rapist murderer. Around this time, there were hundreds of women, mostly black, that were going missing from the downtown LA area. So because a lot of women were basically, there's a crack epidemic, they're drug addicts, and yeah, basically there's a crack epidemic. They are drug addicts, they are on drugs, they're addicted, they need money, so they're turning to prostitution, allegedly, in order to help pay for their addictions and help fund their addictions. That doesn't mean that they don't have like loving families at home and people that care about them. That just means that they're going through a hard time right now, and that they have these addictions that they're really, really struggling with. So I just want you guys to understand that, if you're going to understand anything. So he pings on 14 different, not 14, he pings on a bunch of different murders, and they realize that this man is not who they thought he was, and that he might actually be the Southside Slayer, which apparently is a nickname that was given to like 3 killers at the time that are responsible for multiple deaths in the early 90s. Okay. So his DNA pings, and it pings for so many different murders, and murders ranging from the youngest being 21 and the oldest being 45, I believe. And all of these women were black women that basically, seemingly, I don't want to say for like certain 100%, but it seems like that's kind of what was going on, that they would be addicted to drugs, and that it was fairly easy for him to lure them, because he just would basically lure them with the promises of like crack, and instead of providing that crack once they saw him or whatever, he would strangle them. Now, all of the victims were killed and strangled with his bare hands. And that was sort of like his signature. Like, he would kill and he would basically suffocate these women to death, which is suffocation. So, his earliest victim that we think, or the one that he was charged with, it might not have been his actual first victim, but basically, because we're unsure, and he is not speaking, of course, and he's actually kept quiet for quite some time. The first victim is thought to be Diane Johnson. Now, Diane Johnson, and there are a lot of victims, so we're not going to get into like what happened with every single victim, because then the video would be way, way long. So basically, Diane Johnson, she was thought of as the first victim, and her body was found on March 9th, 1987. And it was basically found by two passing motorists on a roadway in construction area of West Harbor. And she'd been raped, strangled, and stripped of her clothes from basically the waist down. And that's sort of the MO that we're going to see repeat over and over as we go with the victims. Then we have Alejandra Drace Bunn, who was 33, and this is June of 1987. And she was found lying in a pile of trash. Her body was discovered by an 11-year-old named Alvin. And it shows, her autopsy showed that she had battered and bloody eyes, abrasions, lacerations on her head and her neck, and bruises on her neck and her torso. Then we have Annette Ernest, who's 26 years old. And she was found on October 29th, 1987. And she was found lying on the side of the road, and she was partially nude, of course, waist down, like his MO, and she was strangled. And the oddest part about this is that she was actually the daughter of Mildred White, who was friends with Jerry Johnson Triplett, who is the mother of one of his other victims. So basically, Annette's mom is friends with the mom of another victim. So basically, these pair of friends had their daughters killed by the same man, and years apart, which is like extra nutty if you think about it. Like what are the odds that would even be possible, and even something that like you can even say, like, that's hella weird. Okay, so then here we have Anita Fishman Breyer, or Bayer, I'm sorry if I'm messing that up. In January 1989, she was found partially nude. She was 31 years old, and she was discovered in a garage outside of an alley in Figueroa Street. So whenever you're hearing about these women or these bodies being discovered, you're going to keep hearing me say Figueroa Street, because that's where he lived. He lived in this area of downtown LA or Southside LA. I don't know, I'm not from LA, but he lived in LA, and basically he killed primarily in that area of Figueroa Street. Street seems to be like one of those really big streets, and it seems to be like a large stretch of land that basically goes through many intersections. It supposedly also goes through like Skid Row area, where that is where the height of like it's basically where the height of the crack epidemic was basically taking place. So it was really like great stomping grounds from him, because one, he felt comfortable, and two, there were just a lot of victims, and it was like a hunting ground for him. So he was able to find that. In Washington, and she's 27. She was found on September 23rd, 1989. She's partially nude and strangled. And she was found inside a garage off Figueroa Street. She was actually 6 months pregnant. And that is terrible. And her baby it's terrible, and it extra hits home right now because I'm 6 months pregnant. So it's just like, girl. So yes. So he was charged with her death, and he was also charged with the death of her fetus, which we don't know if it was a boy or a girl, but we do know that the baby was called, was just nicknamed Baby Washington, and that the autopsy basically determined that the reason that the baby died, of course, is because the mother's strangulation, right? Because if you guys already know, babies need their mother to be living in order to live. So because that was the reason for the baby's death, we get a second conviction from him on this baby. Like, does that make sense? Like, he is charged twice. So he's charged for the mother, and then he's charged for the kid. So then we have Deborah Williams, and Mary Edwards. They're found about a month apart, Deborah being 32 and Mary being 41. And basically, what's really significant about them, you're gonna just remember those two names for right now. But these women were found, and it seems like a lot of the earlier ones were found around an elementary school, and that's gonna be important a little bit later, because who decides to put dead people's bodies at an elementary school where children could potentially find it? But like, I don't know, I'm expecting anything better from serial killers, but like, why would you ever do that? I don't know why I expect anything from serial killers. So now we have the case of Andrea Triplett, which of course is the person who had the friend, like their mom is friends with one of the other victims. And she was discovered 1993 in April. So basically, their kids were killed like 93, 87, like 6 years apart. I'm very bad at math. So I think 6 years apart, maybe 5. I don't know. Their kids were killed 6 years apart, strangled in the same way, partially nude body. She was discovered behind a vacant building, again on Figueroa Street. And she was actually pregnant as well. However, for all my pregnant mamas, we know about around the 24-week mark, I think it is. That's sort of like as a pregnant mama, as a pregnant person, that's sort of the date and the benchmark after you hit your first trimester that you're kind of holding your breath for, because anything prior to that, your baby's not seen as viable. So if you lose a baby prior to 24 weeks, I believe, this is in the US, I'm not sure if it's anywhere else, the baby is not seen as viable because it cannot, or it has like very low chances of like staying alive outside the womb on its own. However, after those 24 weeks, the baby is seen as viable, and basically they will try whatever it takes to save your baby after those 24 weeks, but before, it's seen as basically like a miscarriage. So even though she was pregnant, because her baby had not been viable, seen as viable, because she was only like 2 weeks shy of that viability date, because she's 2 weeks shy of that viability date, her baby wasn't seen as viable, so he wasn't charged with that baby's murder because California just didn't consider that baby viable. So about a month later, Desiree LeMay Jones was found, and she's found in a backyard, strangled, partially nude. Then we have Natalie Joan Pierce, 31. She's found in 1995, and she's found basically next to like an abandoned vacant property, and she'd been strangled. Then we have Mildred Williams, and Mildred Williams was 45, and she's found on November 6, 1996, and she's found partially nude and strangled, and that's just basically what keeps happening. Sorry, pregnant, so I'm also out of breath. But basically, if you're noticing, he has a pattern. So if you're asking yourself, like, hey, why weren't these patterns like linked? Why weren't these victims linked? If like this seems to be like a pattern, right? Like it is partially strangled, found partially nude, sex workers or drug addicts, all Black women. For some reason, connections weren't made, and that these cases weren't linked together until the DNA actually was founded. So then we have Cynthia Annette Johnson. She was 30 years old, found in February 1997. She was strangled to death in Southside Los Angeles. And then we have Paula Donald Vance. And on February 3rd, 38-year-old Paula Vance, she was found in the Olympia tool business in Azusa. And portions of her murder, because this is the weird part, where portions of this particular murder, Paula Vance, and why she becomes such a pivotal person in this case, is because portions of her murder were actually caught on CCTV. Yeah, so like there's video footage and you can actually see her and you can see like the struggle, right? But the problem with this video footage, even though it was caught from like it seeming like a few different angles and things like that, the problem with the footage was just basically that it wasn't super clear footage. So like even though they knew that this man clearly killed this woman, they had it on tape, it wasn't as clear as they would have hoped. So they weren't able to make out anything basically more than, okay, this is a black guy. Okay, he's really tall because he's 6'2". Like, they weren't really being able to make out a lot, basically, is what I'm trying to get at. And he was caught by like 5 cameras. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. 5 different security cameras. And it just so happened that like none of the cameras were able to catch his face. And that's kind of like, not a single camera was able to catch his face. Are you kidding? How? But that's just what it was said. Like, the one camera that would have like caught his face and caught it really good, like, I guess it was one of those motion detected cameras, so it just stopped recording, right? Like 2 seconds right before his face would have been shown. Right before his face would have been shown on the screen, it just kind of stopped recording. So that was, not ideal. Not ideal at all. And Vance, she actually did suffer from mental illnesses. But in trial, and I'm fast forwarding a little bit, in trial, he does try to say that it was consensual. Like, the reason his DNA was there with all these, like, women that got murdered was because like he had consensually had sex with them. And basically that's what they used the CCTV footage to show and to disprove that notion that like, no, this was not consensual sex, and it's obvious that it was not consensual sex. So it, even though the cameras were really grainy and it didn't seem to help, it helped in that regard, so at least it did something. And then his very last victim was seen to be in 1998. And then, it's seen in 1998. And this was Brenda Breas. And she was found strangled. She was 39. She was found strangled in a portable toilet near Little Tokyo. And she was found pretty much like 50 yards away from that hotel that he was staying in at the time. Okay. So, as you guys see, or maybe you guys don't notice, when I'm listing off the dates, there's like huge chunks of time that are missing, and it's very unclear if he just took a break. Like, even from his last one, which was in 1998, prior to the Maria Martinez, where he actually does get arrested, which was all the way in 2002. So it's like, how do you have some where, especially if you're getting away with it for a while, you have some where the victims are being found a month apart, and then you're going on a 2-year, 3, 4-year hiatus. So it's basically thought that he didn't go on a hiatus and that there are just a lot of missing victims. And that can be the case, of course, but the only person that can really confirm that is him. Because what basically happened was that even though there were 80 or so women who's sort of like, when they were going back through, when they were combing the cases of the times, there are like 80 or so women whose crimes and like their murders basically matched his MO, but they couldn't pin it on him or like you know, make it stick or whatever, because the DNA samples for these women were either not taken, or the ones that were taken were destroyed already. So he's like, yeah. And when you bring it up to him, he kind of like, because I did watch a video call where, not like a radio call or whatever, where he basically, when the guy brought up to him like, hey, so like, I don't believe you took a break in your killing. He was like, oh yeah, they mentioned like 80 other bodies, like, you know, like kind of just like impact, like, oh yeah, they mentioned that there might be some other people there, but I don't know why they didn't charge me for that. They only charged me for these people, which doesn't sound like, oh yeah, no, I didn't kill 80 people. It sounds like, oh yeah, I mentioned them, so where are the charges for them? Like, you didn't charge me for all of my people. And I think that's what it is. And despite sounding like that, he's not being cooperative at all. And I think he's actually currently, as we speak, present day, like trying to seek an appeal or something. But like, how's your DNA hit on all of these different people that are dead, and you're asking people for an appeal? Like, come on. At this point, we just let it be for real. That's ridiculous. Ooh. Sorry, my baby is like chicken. Okay. Is it like weird to talk about stuff like this while like your baby can hear you? Because like they said that this girl could hear me from like a month ago, and I've been listening to true crime podcasts and everything, and like researching this case and whatever for a little bit now. So hopefully she doesn't come out all true crime obsessed like her mother. Turner is basically convicted of 11 murders on May 10th, 2007. And he's sentenced to death on July 10th. So that trial, I feel like the trial kind of went pretty quickly. He's sentenced to death on July 10th, 2007. And then in February 2011, he was charged with 4 additional murders. So he went, apparently in 2007, he was like quoted as saying like, I'll be back. But like, and people were kind of worried and wondering like, what did that mean? Because you're going to be like held in jail. So like, what do you mean you'll be back? But it seemingly thought that what he meant was that y'all gonna find more bodies and I'll be back. And he was right, because in 2011, he was charged with 4 additional murders. And that would be Cynthia Johnson, Alondra Bunn, Mary Edwards, and Deborah Williams. And authorities basically linked Turner to the killings. And on June 2014, he was convicted with those murders, and he actually got another death sentence. I'm not sure how the hell that works, but he got another death sentence. So he's been sentenced to like multiple death sentences. Basically 2020 got an automatic appeal, and this was during the pandemic, well, right before November 2020, no, it was during the pandemic. The California Supreme Court reversed his murder conviction for the 6-month-old baby. So he basically had gotten a death penalty for that one, but then they basically got rid of it. I don't know why they appealed it, but also it kind of didn't matter because he, our forehead is so big. It kind of didn't matter because he still had the death sentences for like the other 14 victims. So like they got rid of one, but like he's still like, you only have one life to give. So giving one man like 3 2, 3 death penalties doesn't make any real sense. Like, how many times are you gonna kill him? Unless we're gonna be like resuscitating people and killing them over again, it doesn't really make sense to give multiple. Which would be like really, really cruel if you think about it. Like, imagine they were resuscitating people and then killing them again. Why do I even say that? That's terrible. What the heck? Wow, this stuff is really, really, really clearly taking a toll on him. He is currently in the year 2024 on death row at San Quentin State Prison, and he has 2 children. They're currently in their 20s. However, at the time of his arrest, they were 4 and 5 respectively. According to him, he doesn't speak to his father much, and he keeps in contact some with his mother while he's in prison. And yeah, and the case should be over, right? Because we had this man, the man went to jails, right? Like, we should be pretty much done with this case. However, major plot twist coming at you right now. You guys were wondering, like, hey, how are so many people getting killed, and like nobody was asking any questions or anything like that? And basically, is it because like it's a bunch of black women that nobody seems to care, and like, or maybe because they're a bunch of like thought to be prostitutes? I don't like, you know, we all know that what their conversation was prior to, so I don't want to say that they were like prostituting, but like that's kind of like what the general consensus is. But if you're wondering like why does it seem like nobody really cares, and like none of these things are like picking up or enough to pick up like a red flag or make anybody basically stop and pay attention, like, hey, something really crazy is going on with these people. Yeah, they did. They did. Remember, I told you to keep 2 names in mind, and I told you to keep in mind that a lot of these victims, the earlier victims, were found by an elementary school. So, insert David Allen Jones into this part. So, he was a part-time janitor at this elementary school that all these bodies kept basically piling up around, right? So, that don't look too good. Because I believe 4 to 6 of the victims were found around that elementary school, and he worked there. When you make pregnant, it's so much work. I haven't done this in a while. Okay. He was a part-time janitor that was working at the school, and he's reported to have an IQ of 64, which is like very low. No, 62. And that basically classified him as intellectually disabled. So he's not able to, like, you know, think like we do or anything like that. And basically, he was questioned and interrogated. He didn't have anyone with him, like an advocate or anybody, to make sure that he understood what was going on. And basically, as a result of this interrogation and investigation, he was sentenced, and he was found guilty of the murders of Tammy Christmas, the Williams and Edwards girls that I had told you to remember earlier. Yeah, and Jones, he was like barely literate, so like they're having him sign things and he can't read. And he was convicted of the murders of these girls in 1995, and he was sentenced to 36 years to life in prison. So there was a major discrepancy, of course, because he didn't do it, so you assume that there are going to be a few discrepancies. But one of the major discrepancies was that his blood type didn't match the blood type of the killers, basically. And basically, the killers were all four kids that he was uh, being accused of killing. They all were killed with somebody, and the DNA evidence that was there was type A blood. I'm type A blood. So, like, it was type A blood, and he's type O blood. And, like, type A and type O, they're, like, way on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Like, you can't mix that up. Like, no. But even though that discrepancy was, like, even though that discrepancy was told and like the jury was aware of it, they still convicted him, which is just like, how do you still like that literally screams, hey, you got the wrong guy. Why would you still be convicting this man? Like, I can't. That is just like the oddest, the weirdest turn ever. So of course, when the DNA kit comes in from Turner, um and it pings on two of the murders. He was convicted, it seems like Jones was convicted for four, and it's thought of that Turner killed all four of those girls and uh whatever, but I guess they only had the DNA kit for two of those girls by the time they found out or something. I have no idea. But he, like, only two of those girls got on as, like, on his official victim list. The other two girls didn't, and I don't understand why, but they didn't have enough evidence to officially put those other two girls on, I guess. Remember, he was arrested in 1995, and, like, Turner was still killing people. So, like, there's still, like, murderers, because I don't know if you guys watch, like, Law and Order SVU or whatever. Like, there's still murders that are, like, matching the same MO happening. So, like, how is this man in jail for these murders if, like, there's still murders that, like, match that MO happening? So, like, clearly that shows you that that's not the guy. That's just my thought on the case. Like, clearly, if, like, maybe you might have gotten the wrong guy, but especially because they knew that, or maybe they didn't know, but especially because, like, he was a little bit slower and things of that nature, I think they were just kind of, like, pressed to solve. And, like, this city is, like, people are scared. Of course, there are people killing people all around, and I think the police department just wanted a win, so they wanted a closed case, and they went ahead and closed the case. And basically what ends up happening is, because two of the DNA hits were Turner's and it was on Jones's case was eventually basically thrown out, and it was basically discovered that he was wrongfully convicted, which he was wrongfully convicted. And this was after him spending, some places said, like, 11 years. Like, some places said that he spent 11 years in prison, and other places said 9. So we're gonna go with, like, 10 years, because it's just smack dab in the middle. Because it says that he was exonerated, all right, due to the DNA evidence, and he was released from prison in 2004. So that is 2 years. 2 years. I think that's why there's a discrepancy between the people, because even though in 2002 is when Turner gave his DNA, it wasn't enough to, like, they didn't exonerate Jones, even though they had the DNA and it matched. Like, Jones wasn't exonerated till 2 years after. So, like, for 2 years, you're basically just playing with the man. Like, you're playing in his face. Like, what do you mean? Like, for 2 years, so you know that this guy is innocent. Like, not to mention the last, like, 8 years. But you are 100% aware that this guy is innocent and that you have the wrong guy. And you basically don't do nothing about it for 2 years. Like, that That to me is nuts. Like, so basically he spent, I guess, in those 2 years from 2022 to from 2002 to 2004. I don't know if they let him know. Like, that's interesting. Like, I wonder if they let him know that the DNA was found and that, like, like, hey, by the way, like, when did the call come? Like, that's my question. Like, when did the call come? Like, hey, by the way, we know you're here, and we know you're innocent, and we finally believe you, because like he didn't confess, but then basically like he never confessed, but he basically confessed to like having seen them around, and that is what they turned into like his confession apparently. But again, he had an IQ of like 62, so like he was just admitting to like knowing or having seen them, and that was good enough for the police at the time, which, as you guys know, it shouldn't have been, because he was basically wrongfully convicted. But I really want to know, like, how does it go, and why does it take so long? Because I heard, sorry, I want to know, how does it go and why does it take so long? Because I definitely did hear that in order for someone to get like even if they know that the person didn't do it, in order for them to get like exonerated, like they won't exonerate it into an open case. It needs to be exonerated into like basically a closed case, meaning like if it wasn't you, then who? Like, it's not enough to just prove like after you have gone through like the trial and everything. It's not enough to prove that, to just like prove that it wasn't you, and until they have like a suspect or a lead, that they basically just keep you anyway, even though they know it's not you. I don't know if that's true or not, but if that is true, like honestly, we need to work on our American legal justice system, because what the heck do you mean? Like, and then like I really do wonder how they told this man that, like, and when, like, did you tell him in 2002? Did you tell him in 2003? Like, when did you go ahead and tell this man? And then like how does that go? I'm wondering, because if you guys know that you basically have stolen this man's life from him, and you have taken, like, you took 10 years of his life, and honestly, that's a black man. Like, that, you took 10 years of this man's life. He was completely innocent. You knew he was completely innocent for at least the last 2 years. And I think, like, you guys had to have known a little bit sooner that, like, this man don't know what's going on here. He doesn't know up from down. And y'all are just trying to basically pin this on somebody. But... and y'all just basically trying to close a damn case. Exonerated, and he was released from prison March 2004, and he filed a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles, as he should. Finally, somebody was looking out for this poor dude, and they were like, yo, like, that's not okay. Like, what they did was not okay. And I would expect him to get like millions of dollars, but he did not get not even $1 million, which was like the most shocking thing to me, because you just took 10 years off of somebody's life and like basically dragged them through the mud, made him a damn felon. But I think your record is stripped, like, but you were gonna lock him up for life had this man not raped Maria, or had Maria actually just not said anything, because I think that's what he was banking on. I think he was banking on the fact that he didn't think that Maria would say anything, which is crazy, because you and Maria are not friends for you to be banking on this. Like, so it's really weird. Like, it's crazy to me, because had Chester had not decided to like let Maria go, which is like super weird because he's a murderer. So like, he's a murderer. Like, why did you not saying he should have killed her, but like, why the change of heart? Like, you've been killing. and you kind of have a good thing going. Why did all of a sudden you, like, you know, not kill this one? And then escort her back to her room, and then basically like escort her back to the shelter, and then like basically threaten her and tell her don't tell anybody, and like just assume that she was just gonna hold you down and keep that for you. Like, what? Y'all are not friends. What loyalty does she owe you? You just raped her. Like, but had he not done that, then poor Jones would have been in jail for some of these murders that he committed for the rest of his life, because clearly nobody was looking into it anymore. It was like a closed shut case, and that is why when they found him and they ran his DNA, like, they weren't looking for anything about those victims or anything about that case at all. Like, that's the crazy part. They found him by accident. Like, they had already given up on those cases from the 90s. Like, they didn't really, I don't say they didn't really care anymore, but those were all cold cases. And he had essentially gotten away with it. This man, out of nowhere, coming on in and committing this crime. And of course, this was like a heinous and terrible crime. And this woman, because she had the courage, and like, thank God for Maria, because she had the courage to stand up and say, like, hey, I'm snitching. Like, you know, she's not keeping any secrets for the man. She decided to tell her truth. And the counselor that like also worked there with him didn't try to sweep it under the rug, which I like. You know, like, nobody was trying to keep this a secret. And a lot of cases, like, you'll see that like people try to keep things a secret, especially like, oh, we work together as my coworker, oh, maybe you're mistaken. Like, none of that happened, and everything sort of like played its part in making sure that not only Maria got justice, that these other women and their families got justice as well. And a lot of these women's families, like, even though these women were dealing with substance abuse and things of that nature, like, they had families that cared about them, families that wanted them to get clean, families that were trying to help them get clean. Like, they definitely had families, and they wanted to help their person, and they never got a chance because there are evil people in this world like Turner who will see the baits, like, who will like bait them and hurt them. And then unfortunately we have this sort of mentality, and I don't know if it's just a new American mentality, or if it's a mentality all around, where if the victim is not a perfect victim, if the victim, like, we care about victims, but then if the victim themselves are like doing something, like, you know, like, if they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing or anything like that, then it's sort of seen like, yes, you're a victim, but you were asking for it. Sort of the kimonte, like, you know, like, who sent you to go over there and do that, and that's why this happened to you, and it's basically your own fault. And that's how like things are seen a lot of the time. So because these women were on drugs, I feel like these cases were not taken as like seriously, and like people weren't seeing the connection, and definitely like law enforcement wasn't seeing the connection between these women and these killers and things of that nature. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to watch this episode of Melanated Mysteries. If you guys have a case that you want me to check out or research and do for my next video, just please comment the case below. What are your thoughts on this whole Chester Turner versus Jones situation? And why do you think Chester was able to get away with it for so